Today is January 21st, 2024. I want to begin by thanking everyone for their patience and also support. I had been feeling a little bit under the weather. I took a few days off to rest. I'm feeling much better now. I'm back to business. I want to talk about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, and I want to talk about how the conflict is deteriorating for Ukraine and its Western backers to the extent that they are almost entirely focused on making it appear that it is not deteriorating. But before I get into that, let's check the live map. This is liveuamap.com. It is a pro-Ukrainian live map. Keep that in mind as we look at it. They're often very slow to show any changes in favor of Russia. But you remember me talking in several updates about this cross-river operation Ukraine was conducting over the Dnieper River around Kherson. There is no mention of that anywhere on this map. And as a matter of fact, the only mention of any activity in this area is Russian forces pounding the Ukrainian side of the Dnieper River in Kherson. We can see that these meager gains that the Ukrainian spring, summer, fall offensive last year made, these are being overturned by Russian forces. And of course, particularly intense fighting is taking place all around Avdiivka, where Russian forces are slowly encircling and closing off this heavily fortified city. It has been fortified and held by Ukrainian forces since 2014. They have underground fortifications. They are as dug in as they possibly can be here in Avdiivka, and yet Russia is still making progress, cutting them off. And it will be just as it was in Bakhmut, or say Azovstal, in Mariupol. There will be no difference. Inevitably, Russian forces will close off Avdiivka and they will take the city. It's just a matter of time. Now, getting back to this recent public relations campaign that Ukraine and its Western backers are on to try to make it appear as if things are not actually going all that bad for Ukraine, that they are managing to strike back at Russia. Now, as I go over these news stories, you're going to realize that this is just more of the same, what the Western media has been doing all throughout this conflict. I want to start with this article from CNBC. Drone strikes hit St. Petersburg, Russian oil depot on fire. And the article says Russia claimed on January 18th that Ukraine had attacked several areas of the country with drones, including the northwestern Leningrad region for the first time. Four oil tanks at a depot in the western town of Klintsy caught fire after the Russian military downed the Ukrainian strike drone, the regional governor said. This was on January 19th. Of course, these attacks have no strategic or even tactical importance. And as a matter of fact, I have talked about Western articles in the past admitting the impact this is having on, say, the Russian population, admitting that all it does is galvanize the Russian public behind Moscow in support of the special military operation even further. And the primary focus of these drone strikes is to boost the morale of the Ukrainian public, and I would say the wider pro-Ukrainian global public. Ukraine is carrying out these type of attacks, not just because of bad news coming out of Avdiivka every day and along the line of contact, but also in response to these recent Russian missile and drone strikes. There have been several waves of massive missile and drone strikes. They are wiping out Ukraine's air defenses, other military infrastructure, military industrial facilities, whatever is left of them. These strikes are having a strategic and tactical impact on the conflict. It is eroding Ukrainian military capabilities far behind the line of contact as Russian forces grind down Ukrainian troops on the line of contact. Ukraine is responding to this. Incapable of responding in kind, they need to try to do this in a way to play up their strengths in terms of public relations. That is what these type of strikes actually represent. Now, they're trying to make it look as if they're able to fight back, that they're taking out heavy costs on Russia. Meanwhile, there's articles like this. This is from NBC News. Incredibly stark. Biden aides give lawmakers a grim assessment of Ukraine without more aid. The president's national security aides said in a private meeting this week that Russia could win the war within weeks if Congress doesn't act. President Joe Biden's top aides bluntly told lawmakers in a private meeting on January 17th that if Congress fails to authorize additional military aid for Ukraine in the coming days, Russia could win the war in a matter of weeks, months at best, according to two people familiar with the meeting. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and the Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines told the lawmakers that Ukraine will run out of certain air defense and artillery capabilities in the coming weeks, according to people familiar with the meeting. But as I've pointed out over and over again, these capabilities are going to dwindle, diminish, and disappear regardless of whatever financial aid is available. It's not a matter of financial aid, it's a matter of military industrial production. The West's support for Ukraine has exceeded its ability to produce these weapon systems and ammunition for them. They have exhausted their stockpiles, and they do not have enough to sustain this proxy war against Russia. That's all there is to it, and there's nothing that can be done to change this, not in the short or even intermediate time. And freeing up more money is not going to help buy weapons and ammunition that simply do not exist. And it's not just the United States talking like this, it is also France. This is from France 24. Macron urges French defense firms to boost production to support Ukraine. And the article says, since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, Macron has pushed the defense industry to switch to war economy mode, reiterating his call during a visit to the Cherbourg naval base in northwestern France. We must amplify the transformation we have begun to respond more quickly to Ukraine's needs in this war against Russia, Macron said in his New Year's address to the French armed forces. We can't let Russia think that it can win. Macron added, warning that a Russian victory would mean the end of European security. We must never again be satisfied with production deadlines that extend over several years, the president said. He said the defense manufacturers were expected to ramp up speed and volume as well as innovate. And I don't believe that President Macron could say these things while actually knowing what a war economy mode actually is, whatever that is, according to President Macron. And I do not think that he and the people around him understand military industrial production, because none of the things he said can be done without investments in terms of time and resources that will be measured in years. This cannot be done in weeks or months. It cannot be done in 1 or 2 years. It will take many years to transform the French economy to produce the amount of weaponry and ammunition Ukraine requires to just match what Russia is able to produce. Russian military industrial capabilities have been developed throughout Soviet times. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the Russian Federation inherited this vast military industrial capacity. They modernized it and they expanded it where they needed it to, and they prepared for this conflict specifically years in advance. And it will take France, the United States, the rest of Europe, the rest of America's allies, it will take them years to transform their economies and their military industrial base to match, let alone exceed, Russia's. In terms of a Russian victory ending European security, I think it will do exactly the opposite. The only thing a Russian victory is going to threaten is the current political order that has control over Europe, has had control over Europe since the end of the Cold War. And I think we could agree that it is a political order that has misled, exploited, squandered Europe's best potential, greatest potential. And I believe that once they are moved out of the way and a Russian victory will be a step in that direction, I think they will be going back in a more constructive direction, which includes cooperating rather than seeking conflict with Russia and also, and probably especially, China. And this was all taking place before the US and political interests in Europe allied to the US before they used the war in Ukraine as an excuse to derail Russian relations with Europe and also Chinese relations with Europe. We see the United States and also France admitting that they have this huge problem. They need to mobilize their whole society, Western civilization as a whole. I mean, that is what's implied by what both the US and France are admitting in these last two articles. They need to mobilize the whole of Western civilization to match or exceed Russian military capabilities to give Ukraine what it needs to fight and win. But we still see articles like this attempting to suggest that the West and Ukraine are winning anyway. The reason this news story will not go away is precisely because things are actually so bad for Ukraine. So we're talking January 19th, almost a week after this supposedly happened. Business Insider, Ukraine says it shot down a key Russian spy plane, and Russia's latest move suggests it's worried. And this is all according to UK military intelligence, which has one of the worst records in terms of analyzing anything at all related to this current ongoing conflict. They're talking about this Russian A-50 airborne early warning and control aircraft. It was supposedly shot down sometime last week. There is no evidence that it was shot down. Nobody knows one way or the other, but let's just listen to what this article says. It says, British intelligence said that a Russian A-50 almost certainly exploded and subsequently crashed into the Sea of Azov. Almost certainly. Where's their evidence of this? Why are they saying almost certainly? They never say. Which is more than 50 miles into Russian-held territory and away from the front lines of the war. The UK's defense ministry said in its latest daily intelligence update that it appeared the Russian Air Force on Wednesday deployed another A-50 aircraft, but this time over land within Russian territory near the Krasnodar region and further east from Ukraine. This activity is highly indicative of a reduced risk appetite for the airframes and an attempt to preserve remaining A-50 mainstay at a loss to its overall effectiveness over Ukraine, British intelligence said. No, it isn't, because if you had A-50s, these type of aircraft, you would deploy them in many different areas. Many different areas need to be covered by these aircraft. You would deploy them in different areas. The aircraft being deployed in a different area does not mean that they're avoiding a certain area because they're worried they'll get shot down. Again, this would be the first time an A-50 was shot down by Ukraine in this conflict. I was listening to Alexander Mikuras covering this over the last week. He's talked about the fact that if it did happen, it most likely was a very elaborate trap set by Ukraine. It is not something that would be easily replicated. And these are the type of public relations stunts Ukraine tries to pull off to make up for the fact that strategically, tactically, by all other measures, Ukraine is losing this conflict. So they need these big PR wins to offset the fact that in every other regard, they are losing. If you read this article, though, they talk about deploying another A-50 aircraft. So even if this one A-50 was shot down last week, Russia has other A-50s they can deploy in its place. Russia is capable of replacing these when they lose them. The A-50 is one of the more difficult pieces of equipment, and the crews will be probably more difficult to replace than other pieces of equipment. But they're not incapable of doing it, and so they will do it. Ukraine is not capable of downing A-50s fast enough to exceed Russia's ability to replace them, and that goes for virtually every military capability Russia has. On the other hand, that is all Russia is doing to Ukraine. They are taking out manpower, equipment, forcing Ukraine to exhaust ammunition faster than it can be replaced. Now, finally, I want to talk about this article, video actually from CNN. Video captures Ukrainian drone assaults on Russian troops, and says down here, this reporter from CNN reports from Avdiivka, Ukraine, where Ukrainian military leaders say they are able to hold back many of Russia's assaults despite being outgunned and outmanned. And this is the Bakhmut narrative all over again. Bakhmut will hold. Russia is sending human waves. They're fighting with shovels, and Ukraine's going to be able to hold the city till they cannot hold the city. And I just wanted to show you articles from when fighting was taking place in Bakhmut rather than in Avdiivka. And we have this from Business Insider. Wagner Group can only afford to throw soldiers into Bakhmut's meat grinder for another 2 months before it runs out of men, Ukrainian commander says. So this is the same narrative that they're using now in Avdiivka. They were using this narrative regarding Bakhmut, and the next month Russia says Ukrainian city of Bakhmut captured. And of course, it was captured, and it has remained under Russian control ever since. Despite Ukraine's best efforts, they have been unable to retake Bakhmut. And articles like that were plentiful in the media at the time. Human wave tactics are demoralizing the Russian army in Ukraine. They're talking about Bakhmut. Russia's human wave attacks are another step into hell. This was from the Washington Post, and this was all right before Russia took Bakhmut. And of course, Russian losses spiked when fighting was taking place in Bakhmut. There's no denying that. And they're spiking again, although far less losses in Avdiivka than in Bakhmut. But the main point is Ukraine's losses are many times greater. They're many times greater. CNN is admitting that they're outgunned and they're outmanned. The video is about these drones Ukraine is using to kill Russian soldiers and destroy Russian equipment, which of course is happening. The scale of fighting that's taking place in Ukraine means there are going to be losses on both sides, because both sides have drones up in the air all around the clock. There's going to be a steady stream of footage coming in from both sides of either side killing their enemies and destroying their equipment. You have to put it in context, however. You cannot just selectively report footage that shows the side you favor destroying the enemy and not explaining how much more equipment the enemy is destroying of yours. In reality, in Avdiivka, even these drones that Ukraine is using to create these videos that CNN is reporting on, Russia has many times more of these drones, and they're using them against Ukraine with just as great effect, possibly more, because we've seen other admissions in the Western media that Russian electronic warfare is superior to Ukraine's, which means Ukrainian troops have a certain number of drones. They're using them against the Russians. They have a certain amount of success. Electronic warfare on the Russian side is preventing greater success by Ukrainian drones. Not only does Ukraine not have as good of electronic warfare as Russia, they have fewer drones. And so Russia has more drones, better electronic warfare, more drone attacks on Ukrainian soldiers. Ukraine has less ability to defend against them, which means higher casualties for Ukraine. That is something that CNN is not going to tell you about, but that is a reality that is unfolding on the battlefield, which brings us right back to these articles about President Biden and President Macron talking about how they need to mobilize their respective societies, because right now they're unable to provide Ukraine what they need. Stories like this from CNN, other stories about shooting down Russian planes and how Russia won't be able to replace its losses. This is the same distorted reality the Western media has been providing the global public since this conflict began, actually all the way back in 2014, but of course, especially since Russia began the special military operation in February 2022. And now we're in 2024. And despite the best efforts by the Western media to depict this as some sort of stalemate, or attempts by the Western media to depict these Ukrainian attacks on Russia as successful and growing in number, the reality is the West is exhausted. Ukraine is losing far more troops and equipment than Russia is. The West has no ability to replace those losses, and this is having an accumulative effect. I've talked about this many times before. This is going to continue all along the line of contact until there's local and then a general collapse of Ukraine's fighting capacity. and then this will allow Russia to achieve the objectives it seeks in this special military operation, whatever they may be. The conflict will conclude on Russia's terms, unless, of course, the collective West decides to intervene more directly. We'll have to keep a close eye on this as additional developments unfold. I will do additional videos. Until then, if you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. I particularly suggest you follow me on Telegram. Absolutely everything goes on Telegram, including backups of all of my videos. In the video description, there are also all of the links that I referenced in this video, as well as for ways you can help support my work. I don't monetize my YouTube channel or any of my social media platforms. If ads pop up, feel free to skip past them. They're not helping me out at all. If you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also Patreon. To those who are supporting my work month to month or through one-time donations, or even if you're just sharing my work with others, thank you so much. That is what makes this work possible. So again, thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.